What happens when the woman everyone fears as cursed becomes the missing piece that immortal royalty has been seeking for centuries? Tonight's story takes us to modern-day Salem, Massachusetts, where Scarlett Morrigan has spent her 31 years watching 3 husbands die under mysterious circumstances, earning her the whispered title of Black Widow and complete social exile from a community that treats her as a harbinger of death. As a woman whose very presence seems to bring misfortune to those who love her, she's grown accustomed to being feared, avoided, and blamed for tragedies that she couldn't prevent or understand. But when Lord Damian Blackwood, the ancient alpha vampire whose immortal existence has been marked by centuries of searching for his destined mate, encounters a woman whose dark reputation masks supernatural gifts that complement his own otherworldly nature, he recognizes something that transcends every superstition about death and destiny. This timeless being, who has witnessed the rise and fall of empires and knows the difference between genuine curses and misunderstood blessings, sees in Scarlett not a bringer of doom, but the eternal companion whose unique abilities make her perfect for someone who exists between life and death. If you believe that those labeled as dangerous or cursed often possess exactly the gifts that someone special has been waiting to treasure, hit that subscribe button now, because this story will reveal the transformative power of being claimed completely by someone who sees your supposed curse as their greatest blessing. Scarlett Morrigan stood alone at the edge of Greenlawn Cemetery, her black dress stark against the autumn landscape as she placed fresh roses on 3 graves that bore the names of husbands who had died too young, too suddenly, and too mysteriously for Salem's superstitious residents to dismiss as mere coincidence. At 31, she had earned a reputation that made grown men cross the street to avoid her path and mothers pull their children closer when she passed. "There's the Black Widow," she heard Mrs. Patterson whisper to her companion as they hurried past the cemetery gates. 3 husbands dead before 40, each one dying within 2 years of marrying her. That's not natural, not normal. "They say she's cursed," replied Mrs. Coleman, with the kind of fearful fascination that small towns reserved for their most notorious residents. "That death follows her like a shadow, claiming anyone fool enough to get too close." The accusations weren't entirely wrong, though they missed the complexity of Scarlett's situation entirely. Each marriage had been born of genuine love and hope for normal happiness, yet each had ended with sudden tragedy that defied medical explanation. Thomas had died of a heart attack at 35 despite perfect health. Marcus had succumbed to a rare blood disorder that appeared overnight. David had been found dead in his study with no apparent cause, leaving doctors baffled and a widow blamed for mysteries beyond her understanding. "I'm sorry," Scarlett whispered to the 3 marble headstones that represented her attempts at conventional happiness. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I just wanted to love and be loved like everyone else." The cemetery was the only place where she could speak freely, without fear of being overheard and judged. Here, among Salem's perpetual reminders of mortality, she could acknowledge the guilt that ate at her daily, not because she had actively caused these deaths, but because some part of her seemed intrinsically connected to loss and ending. As she prepared to leave her weekly vigil, Scarlett noticed a figure watching her from beneath the ancient oak tree that dominated the cemetery's eastern section. Tall, pale, and dressed in expensive clothes that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the late afternoon light, he observed her with an intensity that should have been alarming, but somehow felt familiar. "Mrs. Morrigan," he said, as she approached the cemetery entrance, his voice carrying an accent that seemed to blend multiple European influences across different eras. "It's Ms. Morrigan now," Scarlett corrected with tired dignity. I've decided that marriage isn't a risk I should inflict on anyone else. And yet, you continue to hope for connection, for someone who might understand the complexities of your particular situation. The observation was delivered with such accurate insight that Scarlett stopped walking to study this stranger who seemed to see more than her reputation would suggest. I'm sorry, but I don't believe we've been introduced. Are you new to Salem? In a manner of speaking, the man replied with a slight smile that revealed teeth that seemed just slightly too sharp for normal human dentition. I'm Damian Blackwood. I've come to Salem following reports of unusual circumstances that require investigation. What kind of unusual circumstances? The kind that involve someone whose presence affects the boundary between life and death in ways that most people couldn't understand or appreciate. Something in his tone made Scarlett's pulse quicken with recognition that this conversation was about more than casual curiosity. And you think I might know something about such circumstances? I think, Damian replied with conviction that made her breath catch, that you are such circumstances, and I've been searching for someone exactly like you for a very long time. Standing in the cemetery where her past lay buried, Scarlett felt the first stirring of possibility she had experienced in years. Searching for someone like me? Scarlett repeated, studying Damian's aristocratic features that seemed both timeless and somehow familiar, as if she had seen his likeness in old paintings or historical portraits. Mr. Blackwood, I should warn you that getting involved with me has proven unfortunate for the men who've tried. Unfortunate how? Damian asked with genuine curiosity rather than the fear or morbid fascination that usually accompanied discussions of her romantic history. 3 dead husbands tend to discourage potential suitors, Scarlett replied with dark humor that had become her defense against a reputation she couldn't escape. Salem has decided I'm cursed, that I bring death to anyone who gets too close. And do you? Bring death, I mean. The question was asked with such matter-of-fact interest that Scarlett found herself considering it seriously rather than offering her usual deflections. I don't know, she admitted with honesty that felt dangerous to voice. I loved them all genuinely, wanted nothing but happiness for them, yet each one died under circumstances that defied explanation. Either I'm the unluckiest woman alive, or there's something about me that's genuinely dangerous to the people I care about. What if there's a third option? Damian suggested, moving closer with fluid grace that made him seem to glide rather than walk. What if your connection to death isn't a curse but a gift that's been misunderstood by people too limited to appreciate its true nature? A gift. Scarlett laughed with bitterness that held no humor. 3 men are dead, Mr. Blackwood. Hardly what I'd call a blessing. 3 mortal men, Damian corrected with emphasis that made her pause. Men whose lifespans were always going to be brief by supernatural standards, whose deaths may have had nothing to do with your influence and everything to do with natural mortality that you happened to witness. Supernatural standards. Instead of answering directly, Damian gestured toward the historic section of the cemetery where weathered headstones marked graves from Salem's earliest periods. This city has always been a place where the boundary between natural and supernatural is thinner than most locations, he said, as they walked among monuments that predated the witch trials. People have been drawn here for centuries, not because of its history, but because of the mystical energies that made that history inevitable. You talk like someone who was here to witness it personally. Perhaps because I was, Damian replied with casual honesty that should have sounded like fantasy, but somehow felt like simple truth. Scarlett, what I'm about to tell you will challenge your understanding of reality. but I believe your experiences have prepared you to accept possibilities that most people would reject. As evening deepened around them and Salem's supernatural reputation seemed to manifest in the very air they breathed, Damien began explaining concepts that reframed everything Scarlet thought she knew about her own nature. You're not cursed with bringing death. You're blessed with the ability to see beyond the veil that separates life from whatever comes after. Your husbands didn't die because of your influence. They died because their time was ending, and your supernatural sensitivity allowed you to sense their approaching mortality in ways that created unconscious connections to their final moments. Supernatural sensitivity. The same gift that allows certain individuals to commune with spirits, to predict deaths before they occur, to serve as bridges between the world of the living and the realm of the deceased. In medieval times, you would have been revered as an oracle or spiritual guide. In modern Salem, you're simply misunderstood. The explanation offered a framework for understanding experiences that had never made sense through conventional analysis. Her dreams that predicted accidents, her ability to sense when someone was seriously ill before symptoms appeared, the way she felt drawn to places where significant deaths had occurred. All of it could be evidence of supernatural gifts rather than diabolic curses. "And you?" Scarlet asked, studying Damien's pale beauty with new understanding. "What are you exactly?" "Someone who's been alive long enough to recognize authentic supernatural ability when I encounter it," Damien replied with a smile that revealed the truth about his own otherworldly nature. "How long is long enough?" Scarlet asked, as they continued walking through the cemetery, where shadows seemed to gather around Damien with unusual density, as if darkness itself was drawn to his presence. "Approximately 8 centuries," Damien replied with casual honesty that made her stop walking entirely. 8 centuries. Scarlet processed the impossibility of his claim while noting details about her companion that suddenly made perfect sense. His ageless features, his knowledge of historical events, the way he moved with predatory grace that suggested supernatural rather than human nature. "You're a vampire," she said, with the same calm acceptance she had learned to apply to other impossible aspects of her life. "The alpha vampire of the eastern seaboard territories, to be precise," Damien confirmed, allowing his true nature to become visible. His eyes blazing with otherworldly light, his presence filling the space around them with power that made the very air seem to vibrate with controlled force. "And you've been searching for someone like me because in 8 centuries of existence, I've learned that certain supernatural abilities complement vampiric nature in ways that create perfect partnerships. Your connection to death and dying, your ability to sense the boundary between life and whatever lies beyond. These aren't curses to be feared, but gifts that could enhance and be enhanced by immortal perspective." As Damien explained the complexities of vampire society and supernatural politics, Scarlet began to understand how her abilities could serve purposes beyond the tragic coincidences that had defined her mortal experience. "The vampires who prey on humans rather than protecting them," Damien continued, "often succeed because their victims can't sense the approach of supernatural death. But someone with your gifts could detect diabolic vampiric presence before attacks occurred, could serve as an early warning system that saves innocent lives." "You want me to help you hunt bad vampires?" "I want you to become my eternal partner in maintaining the balance between supernatural and mortal worlds," Damien said, with intensity that made her pulse quicken despite everything she thought she knew about her own dangerous nature. "Your abilities would complement my immortal strength in ways that could protect countless innocents while giving your gifts the proper context they've always needed. And personally? What do you want from me personally? Everything, Damien replied with conviction that spanned 8 centuries of searching. I want your companionship, your unique perspective on mortality and death, your supernatural sensitivity guiding my immortal decisions. I want to prove to you that being called a Black Widow by fearful mortals was preparation for being recognized as the perfect mate by someone who understands that death and immortality are complementary rather than opposing forces. The declaration was delivered with such sincerity that Scarlett felt tears gathering in her eyes, not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming possibility of finally finding someone who saw her supernatural nature as a blessing rather than a curse. Damien, she said carefully, if I'm truly connected to death and dying the way you suggest, wouldn't a relationship with me be dangerous even for an immortal being? What if my presence brings you the same fate it brought my husband's? Then it would prove that even vampire immortality has limits, Damien replied with matter-of-fact acceptance that surprised her. But I don't believe that's what your abilities actually do. I think your connection to death serves protective rather than destructive purposes. That you're drawn to people whose time is ending, not because you cause their deaths, but because your supernatural nature compels you to provide comfort and understanding during their final transitions. A psychopomp, Scarlett breathed, recognizing the mythological term for beings who guided souls between worlds. Exactly. And psychopomps don't bring death. They serve it, honor it, help ease the passage from life to whatever comes after. Your husbands were fortunate to have someone with your gifts present during their final moments, even if they couldn't understand the service you were providing. Over the following weeks, as Damien introduced Scarlett to the hidden world of supernatural politics and vampire society, her abilities proved invaluable in ways that validated his theories about her true nature. Her connection to death and dying wasn't a curse that brought misfortune. It was a divine gift that served protective and healing purposes within immortal communities. The rogue vampire who's been terrorizing Boston, Scarlett reported after one of her supernatural visions, indicating locations on maps that Damien used for territorial surveillance. I can see his death approaching within the next month, not from natural causes, but from consequences of his own actions. His victim's anguish is calling for justice that supernatural forces will provide. Excellent intelligence, Damien replied with satisfaction that had become familiar during their collaboration. Your psychopomp abilities reveal outcomes that even vampire political networks can't predict. But their partnership extended beyond professional cooperation into personal territory that challenged everything Scarlett had believed about her romantic prospects. For the first time in her life, she was involved with someone whose immortal nature meant that her connection to death posed no threat to his existence. "You're not afraid of me," she observed one evening as they worked together in his study, surrounded by artifacts and documents that chronicled centuries of supernatural history. "Even knowing about my husbands, even understanding that being close to me might involve witnessing death and endings, you're completely comfortable with my presence." "Because I understand what you actually are," Damien replied, looking up from ancient texts with silver eyes that held 8 centuries of accumulated wisdom. "You're not a harbinger of doom. You're a bridge between life and whatever comes after. Someone whose gifts help ease the transition that every mortal being must eventually face." "And immortal beings benefit from having someone who understands mortality in ways that we've forgotten," Damien said seriously. "Your perspective on death and endings helps me remember why protecting mortal life matters. why the brief span of human existence deserves supernatural protection. Their growing relationship had also attracted attention from other supernatural beings who were beginning to understand the strategic advantages of having a psychopomp allied with vampire authority. The Council of Ancients has requested consultation on the territorial succession crisis, Damien reported with obvious pride in Scarlet's expanding reputation. They want your insights into which vampire lords are likely to survive the political conflicts and which ones are approaching their final destructions. And the Boston Coven's inquiry about spiritual guidance services? They're particularly interested in your ability to help newly created vampires understand their relationship with mortality now that they've transcended it. That evening, as they stood together on the balcony of Damien's historic mansion overlooking Salem Harbor, Scarlet reflected on the transformation that had brought her from feared outcast to valued supernatural consultant. "Do you remember when I thought I was cursed to bring death to everyone I loved?" she asked, watching ships navigate waters that had witnessed centuries of both natural and supernatural history. "I remember thinking how tragic it was that people mistook divine gifts for diabolic curses," Damien replied, gathering her closer as they observed the peaceful harbor that his protection helped maintain. "Your connection to death isn't a curse. It's a sacred calling that serves both mortal and immortal communities. And us? What does my psychopomp nature mean for our relationship? It means you understand both mortality and transcendence in ways that make you the perfect partner for someone who exists between life and death," Damien said, with conviction that made her pulse quicken. "You're not my Black Widow. You're my bridge to understanding the full spectrum of existence." "Bridge to understanding," Scarlet repeated as she studied Damien's immortal features in the moonlight that seemed to celebrate rather than expose his vampiric nature. "Is that what you see when you look at me? Not the woman who's buried 3 husbands, but someone who serves a purpose in the cosmic order. I see someone who's been misunderstood her entire life because mortals fear death and can't appreciate the divine service of helping souls transition peacefully between worlds," Damien replied with intensity that made her breath catch. "I see the eternal companion I've been searching for across 8 centuries, someone whose supernatural gifts complement my immortal nature perfectly. And if my psychopomp abilities eventually reveal that your immortal existence has limits, if I sense your death approaching despite your vampire nature, then I'll be grateful to face that transition with someone who understands what it means and can help me navigate whatever comes after immortality," Damien said with matter-of-fact acceptance that surprised her. "But I don't believe that's how your abilities actually work with supernatural beings. I think your connection to death serves different purposes with immortal partners." Over the following months, Scarlet discovered that her psychopomp nature indeed functioned differently with Damien than it had with her mortal husbands. Instead of sensing his approaching death, she found herself able to perceive the supernatural threats that endangered his immortal existence, the political machinations that could destroy even ancient vampires, and the spiritual imbalances that required correction to maintain his connection to his immortal essence. "You're not death sense for immortal beings," she realized during one of their collaborative sessions. "You're immortal sense. You help supernatural creatures maintain their connection to whatever force grants and sustains their otherworldly existence. Which explains why vampire society values psychopomp partnerships," Damien confirmed with satisfaction. "Your abilities don't threaten immortal beings. They help preserve and strengthen supernatural nature itself." The revelation transformed Scarlet's understanding of her own purpose and potential. Instead of being cursed to destroy the relationships she valued most, She was blessed with abilities that could enhance and protect supernatural partnerships in unprecedented ways. The Council of Ancients has made a formal request, Damien announced one evening as autumn deepened around Salem's mystical landscape. They want to offer you official recognition as Psychopomp Advisor to the Eastern Territories, with full authority to provide spiritual guidance for supernatural political decisions. And your response to their offer? I told them, Damien said with possessive satisfaction that made her pulse quicken, that you already belong to someone, that your abilities serve my territorial protection before any broader supernatural interests, and that they would need to negotiate through me for any consultation services. You told the most powerful vampire council in North America that I belong to you. I told them that you're mine, Damien confirmed with conviction that spanned 8 centuries of unchallenged authority. My psychopomp, my advisor, my eternal partner, and most importantly, my beloved. If they want access to your gifts, they can request it properly through your immortal mate. The possessive declaration should have alarmed her, given her history with controlling relationships, but coming from someone who recognized and valued her supernatural nature completely, it felt like protection rather than domination. And do I belong to you? She asked with heart racing at possibilities she had never allowed herself to imagine. Only if you choose to, Damien replied seriously, though his ancient eyes held hope that transcended any earthly desire. But I very much hope you'll claim me as completely as I'm claiming you, that you'll become my eternal psychopomp, my immortal beloved, my perfect supernatural complement. Standing in moonlight that seemed to celebrate their otherworldly connection, Scarlet felt ready to embrace the belonging she had been searching for her entire life. I choose you, Scarlet said with certainty that surprised her with its intensity. But I want to understand what eternal partnership means before I accept transformation that I can never undo. It means your psychopomp abilities would be enhanced by immortal perspective and supernatural strength, Damien explained, as they stood in his private study surrounded by ancient texts that documented vampire psychopomp partnerships throughout history. Your connection to death and spiritual transition would expand to encompass longer timelines and broader supernatural territories. And personally? Personally, it means spending eternity with someone who sees your death sense as the divine gift it actually is, someone who values your spiritual insights above every mortal prejudice about Black Widow reputations. Over the following weeks, Damien began preparing Scarlet for the transformation process, while introducing her to supernatural communities that would benefit from her enhanced psychopomp services. Her natural abilities were already proving invaluable to immortal beings who needed guidance navigating the spiritual complexities of supernatural existence. The werewolf pack leader in Connecticut is approaching a natural death despite his supernatural nature, she reported during one of their consultation sessions, her enhanced sensitivity revealing patterns that even experienced vampire political networks couldn't detect. His pack needs to understand that his passing will be peaceful transition rather than violent ending. His spiritual energy is ready to transcend even werewolf immortality. And the Witch Coven's concerns about their eldest member's failing connection to mystical forces? She's not losing power. She's preparing to become something beyond traditional witch classification. Her magic is evolving toward psychopomp abilities similar to mine. She should embrace the transformation rather than fighting it. Her insights were revolutionizing how supernatural communities understood spiritual development and transcendence within immortal contexts. But perhaps most importantly, her partnership with Damien was proving that psychopomp nature could enhance rather than threaten immortal relationships. You're not sensing my approaching death, Damien observed with satisfaction as they reviewed their months of collaboration. Your abilities are revealing ways to strengthen my immortal essence rather than predicting its ending. Because psychopomp nature serves different purposes with truly immortal beings, Scarlet confirmed with growing understanding of her own spiritual calling. With mortal partners, I sensed their natural endings approaching. With you, I sense opportunities to enhance and preserve supernatural immortality itself. The transformation ceremony took place during the autumn equinox, when spiritual energies were strongest, and the boundary between mortal and immortal existence was most permeable. As Damien's vampiric essence merged with her psychopomp nature, Scarlet felt not loss, but amplification, her connection to death and transcendence expanding exponentially, while her essential spiritual purpose remained unchanged. "How do you feel?" Damien asked when the transformation completed, his voice carrying 8 centuries of hope and anticipation. "Like myself, but magnificently enhanced," Scarlet replied with wonder, as her immortal senses revealed layers of spiritual reality she had never suspected existed. "My psychopomp abilities now encompass not just individual deaths and transitions, but the spiritual health of entire supernatural communities." Her enhanced gifts immediately proved their value as visions revealed threats and opportunities across multiple territories simultaneously. "The rogue vampire situation in Philadelphia will resolve itself within 2 weeks through natural consequences of their actions," she reported with new clarity. "But the spiritual imbalance they've created will require active correction to prevent broader supernatural disruption." "And our territorial responsibilities here in Salem? Thriving under protection that combines immortal strength with psychopomp spiritual guidance. We've created something unprecedented, a supernatural partnership that serves both individual love and broader community welfare." Their success had attracted attention from vampire authorities across continents who were beginning to understand that psychopomp vampire partnerships represented the future of enlightened supernatural governance. "We've become a model," Damien observed with pride that encompassed 8 centuries of political achievement. "Proof that immortal love and spiritual service can complement each other perfectly." "We've become what I always was, but never understood," Scarlet replied with immortal certainty. "Not a black widow who brings death, but a psychopomp who serves transcendence." 6 months into her immortal existence, Scarlet had become one of the most sought-after spiritual advisors in supernatural society, with vampire courts from 5 continents requesting her psychopomp guidance for conflicts that had resisted traditional immortal resolution methods. Her unique combination of death sense and vampiric enhancement was revolutionizing how supernatural communities approached questions of spiritual health and transcendence. The European Council reports complete resolution of the territorial succession crisis, Damien announced during one of their weekly reviews of international supernatural politics. "Your insights into which vampire lords were spiritually prepared for expanded authority prevented a war that could have destabilized immortal society for decades. And the Asian Federation's inquiry about spiritual development programs? They're implementing your protocols for helping newly transformed vampires understand their relationship with mortality and transcendence. Early results suggest dramatic improvements in psychological adaptation to immortal existence." Her success extended beyond conflict resolution to include therapeutic services that helped supernatural beings understand and appreciate the spiritual dimensions of their immortal natures. Vampires who had viewed their undead status as purely physical transformation were learning to recognize the spiritual evolution that immortality represented. "I've been thinking about my mortal husbands," Scarlet said one evening as they walked through Salem's historic district, where her reputation had been transformed from feared Black Widow to revered spiritual guide. About what my psychopomp abilities were actually accomplishing during their final transitions. What conclusions have you reached? They weren't dying because of me. They were dying at their natural times, and my presence was ensuring their spiritual transitions were peaceful and complete rather than traumatic and incomplete. She paused beside a memorial statue that honored Salem's complex spiritual history. I was serving them even when I thought I was cursing them. And how does that understanding affect your perspective on your current existence? It helps me appreciate that every relationship I've ever had was preparing me for this one, Scarlett replied with immortal wisdom that had been refined through supernatural experience. My mortal marriages taught me to honor the spiritual significance of death and transcendence, which makes me a better psychopomp partner for someone whose immortal nature encompasses both life and death simultaneously. Their relationship had also attracted attention from mortal spiritual communities who were beginning to understand that Salem's mystical reputation was based on ongoing supernatural activity rather than merely historical events. The local Interfaith Council has requested consultation about mysterious spiritual phenomena affecting their congregations, Damien reported with amusement. They don't understand that what they're experiencing is spillover from our supernatural community activities. Should we offer guidance? Carefully. Your psychopomp abilities allow you to serve as a bridge between mortal and immortal spiritual understanding. But we must ensure that enhanced spiritual sensitivity serves protective rather than exploitative purposes. That evening, as they stood together on the balcony of their Salem mansion overlooking the harbor, where merchant ships had once brought prosperity and supernatural energy continued to flow, Scarlett reflected on the complete transformation of her identity and purpose. Do you remember when I thought being called a Black Widow meant I was cursed to destroy every relationship I entered? She asked, watching moonlight illuminate waters that had witnessed centuries of both tragedy and transcendence. I remember thinking how tragic it was that people mistook spiritual service for supernatural curse, Damien replied, gathering her closer as they observed the peaceful harbor that their protection maintained. You were never a destroyer of relationships. You were a guide for souls transitioning between different states of existence. And now? Now you serve that same function on a scale that encompasses both mortal and immortal communities, helping beings understand that death and transcendence are natural parts of spiritual evolution rather than endings to be feared. The perfect purpose for someone who belongs to an immortal being. The perfect purpose for my psychopomp, Damien confirmed with possessive satisfaction that made her feel treasured rather than owned. The spiritual guide who was always meant to be mine. The vindication came when supernatural threats descended upon Salem with a ferocity that would have destroyed both mortal and immortal communities if not for the spiritual protection that Scarlett's psychopomp abilities provided. Her connection to death and transcendence proved invaluable in identifying and neutralizing diabolic forces that sought to corrupt the delicate balance between supernatural and mortal realms. Multiple demonic entities are attempting to establish a permanent portal in the old cemetery, Scarlett announced during one of her enhanced visions, her immortal psychopomp abilities revealing threats that even ancient vampire senses couldn't detect. They're targeting Salem because they believe the historical association with supernatural phenomena will mask their diabolic activities. How many entities? Damien asked, immediately shifting into the strategic mindset that had protected his territories for 8 centuries. 17 demons, led by something that calls itself Baal the Corrupter. They plan to use Salem's mystical reputation to hide their attempts at creating a permanent gateway between hell and earth. The threat was exactly the kind of situation that Scarlet's enhanced abilities were designed to address: supernatural dangers that required both immortal strength and psychopomp spiritual insight to neutralize effectively. "They've made a critical miscalculation," Damien observed as they prepared for what would likely be the most significant supernatural battle in Salem's history. "They don't understand that Salem is protected by someone who serves transcendence rather than corruption, and by someone who recognizes the difference between authentic spiritual power and diabolic manipulation," Scarlet added, her psychopomp nature allowing her to sense the cosmic wrongness that demonic presence represented. The battle that followed demonstrated the perfect complementarity of their supernatural partnership. Damien's immortal strength provided the physical power necessary to engage demonic forces directly, while Scarlet's psychopomp abilities created spiritual barriers that prevented diabolic entities from corrupting mortal souls or establishing permanent supernatural foothold in their territory. But perhaps most remarkably, Scarlet's connection to death and transcendence allowed her to send demonic entities back to their proper realm rather than simply destroying them, serving spiritual justice while maintaining cosmic balance. "You're not just fighting them," Damien observed with wonder as he watched her work. "You're correcting the spiritual disorder that their presence creates, restoring proper boundaries between different planes of existence." "Because that's what psychopomp nature actually does," Scarlet replied as she completed the ritual that sealed the attempted demonic portal permanently. "We don't just guide individual souls. We maintain the spiritual integrity of the barriers between different realms." When the conflict ended with complete victory for supernatural order over diabolic chaos, Salem's residents found themselves experiencing unprecedented spiritual peace and protection, though they couldn't understand the source of their improved circumstances. "The town council wants to declare you Salem's spiritual protector," Damien reported with obvious pride in his immortal partner's growing recognition. "They don't understand the supernatural mechanics involved, but they recognize that your presence has brought protection and peace to the community." From Black Widow to spiritual guardian, Scarlet mused with satisfaction that transcended personal vindication. Quite a transformation in their understanding. "The transformation was never in their understanding," Damien corrected with 8 centuries of wisdom underlying his assessment. "It was in your circumstances finally matching your true nature." That evening, as they received formal recognition from both mortal and supernatural authorities for their protection of Salem's spiritual integrity, Scarlet understood that her journey from feared outcast to revered guardian had always been inevitable. "The people who feared me as a Black Widow," she said with immortal perspective that encompassed both her painful past and transcendent present, "simply didn't understand that my connection to death was actually preparation for serving life. And now they understand that what they called a curse was actually their greatest blessing," Damien replied with possessive pride in the psychopomp who belonged completely to him. 2 years into their immortal partnership, Scarlet and Damien had established the most comprehensive supernatural protection network in North American history, with their psychopomp vampire collaboration serving as the model for enhanced spiritual security across multiple continents. Their success stemmed from the perfect integration of Scarlet's death sense with Damien's immortal authority, creating solutions that addressed both physical threats and spiritual imbalances. The global supernatural accord has been ratified by all major immortal factions, Damien announced during their weekly International Council meeting, reviewing the culmination of Scarlet's most ambitious project. Comprehensive protocols that ensured psychopomp spiritual guidance was available to supernatural communities worldwide. Your framework for maintaining spiritual balance in immortal territories has been adopted by vampire courts on every continent. Excellent, Scarlet replied, reviewing documentation that represented the most significant advancement in supernatural spiritual health in recorded history. What about the implementation of transcendence counseling services for newly created immortal beings? Operating in 17 countries with remarkable success rates. Vampires, werewolves, and other supernatural beings are adapting to their immortal natures with far less psychological trauma when they have access to psychopomp guidance during their transformation periods. Her innovations extended beyond individual counseling to include community-wide spiritual health initiatives that helped supernatural territories maintain the metaphysical balance necessary for peaceful coexistence between immortal and mortal populations. The Vatican has formally acknowledged our work, Damien reported with satisfaction, that spanned 8 centuries of complex relationships with religious institutions. They've created a new theological category for beneficial supernatural service that specifically recognizes psychopomp activities as serving divine rather than diabolic purposes. And the response from other major religious organizations? Universally positive. Apparently, having demonstrable proof that some supernatural beings serve spiritual transcendence rather than opposing it has been tremendously reassuring to mortal faith communities. That evening, as they walked through Salem's historic district, where Scarlet's reputation had been completely transformed from feared Black Widow to beloved spiritual guardian, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from social exile to international recognition. Mrs. Patterson asked me to bless her granddaughter's wedding, Scarlet mentioned with amused irony that held no bitterness. The same woman who used to cross the street to avoid me now believes my presence will bring spiritual protection and marital happiness. From cursed Black Widow to blessed spiritual guardian, Damien observed with 8 centuries of perspective on how human understanding could evolve. Quite a transformation in their perception. The transformation was never in me, Scarlet corrected with immortal wisdom that had been refined through supernatural service. It was in their ability to recognize that what they feared as death-bringing was actually death-understanding, which serves life more effectively than death-denying ever could. Their relationship had become legendary, not just within supernatural circles, but among the mortal communities that benefited from their protection. The combination of Scarlet's psychopomp wisdom and Damien's immortal authority created a leadership model that other supernatural partnerships studied and attempted to emulate. The Council of Ancients has requested permanent consultation services, Damien announced, as they reviewed invitations from supernatural authorities worldwide. They want your psychopomp insights guiding all major territorial decisions that could affect the spiritual balance between mortal and immortal realms. As long as they understand that my primary loyalty is to you and our territorial responsibilities here in Salem, Scarlet replied with the possessive certainty that had developed through their immortal partnership. I belong to you first, serve our love second, and offer broader consultation third. Exactly how it should be, Damien confirmed with satisfaction that made her pulse quicken even after years of immortal existence together. You're my psychopomp before you're anyone else's spiritual advisor. As they prepared for another international supernatural summit where their collaborative model would be adopted by new territories, Scarlet marveled at how completely her understanding of belonging and purpose had been transformed. Do you remember when I thought my connection to death made me too dangerous for lasting relationships? She asked as they stood in the cemetery where they had first met, now sacred ground that was protected by their combined supernatural authority. I remember thinking how perfectly your spiritual gifts complemented my immortal nature, How obviously you were meant to be my eternal psychopomp, rather than anyone's temporary mortal wife, Damien replied, gathering her closer as they observed peaceful grounds where both natural and supernatural forces coexisted harmoniously. And my 3 husbands? Do you think they understood what I was trying to provide for them during their final transitions? I think they were blessed to have someone with your gifts present during the most important spiritual moments of their existence, even if they couldn't appreciate the service you were providing, Damien said, with gentle certainty. Your psychopomp nature served them as beautifully as it serves me, just in different ways appropriate to mortal versus immortal needs. The perfect preparation for eternal partnership with someone who needed a spiritual guide rather than a traditional mortal wife. The perfect preparation for belonging completely to someone who sees your death sense as the divine blessing it actually is, Damien confirmed, with possessive love that made her feel treasured rather than owned. Standing together in moonlight that seemed to celebrate their supernatural union, they embodied the truth that sometimes being feared by the wrong people is preparation for being claimed completely by the right one, and that authentic spiritual gifts eventually find their proper purpose regardless of initial misunderstanding. Your Majesty, Damien said formally, though his ancient eyes held warmth that encompassed both professional respect and eternal devotion. How does it feel to be recognized as the psychopomp you always were, rather than the Black Widow you never actually were? Like coming home to an identity I was always meant to claim, Scarlet replied with certainty that resonated through both mortal and immortal dimensions. Like discovering that every tragedy in my past was preparation for the transcendent purpose you helped me find. 5 years into their immortal reign, Scarlet and Damien had become the most powerful supernatural partnership in global history, their psychopomp vampire alliance revolutionizing spiritual governance across 7 continents, while proving that some beings are meant to transcend every limitation that mortal society attempts to impose on them. The International Supernatural Council has unanimously elected you as the first psychopomp queen in recorded history, Damien announced with pride that encompassed 8 centuries of political achievement, reviewing formal documents that recognized Scarlet's unique spiritual authority over transcendence matters affecting all immortal communities worldwide. Psychopomp Queen, Scarlet repeated the title with wonder at how completely her identity had been transformed from Salem's feared Black Widow to the supernatural world's most revered spiritual guide. From cursed outcast to immortal royalty, from misunderstood spiritual servant to properly recognized cosmic authority, Damien corrected with satisfaction that made the very air around them seem to shimmer with otherworldly contentment. You were always meant to hold spiritual dominion, Scarlet. The question was finding realms enlightened enough to appreciate your true nature. Her reign had established unprecedented cooperation between different supernatural species, with her psychopomp wisdom serving as the spiritual foundation for political alliances that had seemed impossible before her immortal influence began reshaping international supernatural law. The werewolf-vampire territorial accords have eliminated conflicts that had persisted for centuries, she reported during their monthly review of global spiritual governance achievements. When immortal beings understand that death and transcendence are natural parts of cosmic evolution, rather than defeats to be avoided, territorial disputes become opportunities for enhanced cooperation rather than zero-sum competitions. And the integration protocols for newly created supernatural beings? Implemented on every continent with remarkable success. Having psychopomp guidance available during immortal transformation has reduced psychological adaptation problems by 93% across all supernatural species. Their success had also earned recognition from cosmic forces beyond normal supernatural hierarchies, with celestial authorities acknowledging that Scarlet's psychopomp reign served universal spiritual balance rather than merely regional immortal interests. The Angelic Council has formally recognized your authority over spiritual transcendence, matters affecting the boundary between mortal and immortal realms. Damien reported with obvious pride in his Eternal Queen's expanding influence. They specifically cited your unique ability to serve both individual spiritual needs and cosmic spiritual balance simultaneously. That evening, as they stood together in their Salem stronghold, overlooking territories that now spanned multiple continents under their spiritual and immortal protection, Scarlet reflected on the complete transformation of her understanding of belonging and purpose. "Do you remember when I thought being called a Black Widow meant I was destined to destroy every relationship I entered?" she asked, watching supernatural beings move through landscapes that flourished under their combined authority. "I remember recognizing immediately that you were exactly the eternal companion I had been searching for across 8 centuries," Damien replied, gathering her closer as they observed the peaceful coexistence that their reign had made possible. "Your connection to death wasn't a curse that threatened relationships. It was a divine gift that would perfect our immortal partnership." "And Salem, the town that feared me for so long, has become the spiritual capital of the supernatural world, where beings from every immortal species come seeking the psychopomp wisdom that only you can provide," he said with satisfaction that transcended mere territorial pride. Their love story had become legend not just within supernatural society, but throughout cosmic spiritual hierarchies that recognized their partnership as proof that individual transcendence and universal spiritual service could enhance rather than compete with each other. "We've proven something remarkable," Scarlet observed as they prepared for another international summit, where their collaborative model would be adopted by emerging supernatural territories. That being spurned by limited minds was preparation for being claimed by unlimited love. "We've proven that authentic spiritual gifts always find their proper purpose," Damien replied with 8 centuries of certainty underlying every word. "That psychopomp nature belongs with immortal authority, that death sense complements eternal existence, and that you were always meant to be my queen rather than anyone's feared Black Widow, dancing under stars that celebrated rather than feared her connection to death and transcendence." Scarlet embodied the truth that sometimes the qualities that make others reject you are exactly what someone special has been waiting centuries to treasure, and that being called cursed by people with limited vision often means you're actually blessed beyond their ability to comprehend. As Scarlet ruled supernatural realms with psychopomp wisdom, while being loved eternally by someone who recognized her death sense as divine gift rather than diabolic curse, remember that the traits others fear in you might be exactly the qualities that infinite love has been seeking. If this story resonated with your belief that authentic spiritual gifts eventually find their proper recognition and purpose, hit that subscribe button and share this with anyone who needs to remember that being spurned by the wrong people often prepares you for being claimed completely by the right one. Tell us in the comments about a time when being misunderstood led to being perfectly understood. And remember, when fearful minds call you cursed or dangerous, it often means you possess gifts that transcendent love will treasure. Until next time, never let temporary rejection make you doubt your eternal worth. True belonging always recognizes authentic spiritual gifts, even when they come wrapped in reputations that limited minds can't appreciate.